Captives of a Concept, Chapter 7, entitled No False Teachings or Prophecies. Why not? The governing body realizes that Jesus would never have appointed an unfaithful or indiscreet false teacher or false prophet over any of his earthly interests, as mentioned in Matthew 24. But in order for them to bypass this, they had to do something with Russell and Rutherford's teachings that were false. So how can they convince anyone, including themselves, that those men didn't have any false teachings or prophecies when they had so many of them? Here's how. They avoid the word false whenever it is applied to themselves. They remove the word false and then refer to those teachings as past truths. But according to the Proclaimer's book, the society has never had one single false teaching or prophecy. So that's very clever of them. Rather than being negative, they turn the previous teaching that must have been false into something positive, such as past truths and things of the nature. And these newer truths are viewed as positive evidence that Jehovah God is continuing to refine his organization. And so this is how the concept that the society is God's organization is so difficult for people to escape, because they have it ingrained in their mind that nothing is false, but rather it's old light or past truths, rather than spelling it out for what it really is. It was false. How else do they do this? By removing the word prophecy. They refer to their prophecies as Bible prophecies until they realize that they are not true. Then they drop the word prophecy. So all during the period of time of Russell and Rutherford, dates and events were being proclaimed as Bible prophecy. And this has been true of every prophecy that has ever come from the Watchtower. So that's why Jehovah's Witnesses believe them in the first place, because they are fulfillments of Bible prophecy. But once these prophecies are discarded, the word prophecy is also discarded. Very clever of Watchtower. So they were only Watchtower prophecies, because if these prophecies really originated with Jehovah God, they would have came true. But we know that that's not the case. They all originated with men, and none of them have ever come true. And according to Deuteronomy chapter 18, verses 20 through 22, we see the biblical definition of a false prophet. None of the Jehovah's Witnesses prophecies have ever been presented in the name of the Watchtower Society. Rather, as they say on page 365 of the June 15, 1964 Watchtower, quote, Jehovah is the one behind all of it, including their prophesying. So again, they don't attach any personal responsibility to anything that they do. It's all Jehovah's doing. He is the one that's directing all the work. So when it looks like the Bible is trying to tell Jehovah's Witnesses that these men are false prophets, the governing body doesn't allow for that. Why not? Because these conclusions do not fit into what they want to believe. The governing body will not allow the Bible to tell them that Russell and Rutherford were false teachers or false prophets. But notice how they respond when someone tries to point out some of these things. In this Watchtower of March 15, 1986, it says this, quote, some opposers claim that Russell and Rutherford were false prophets. These opponents say that dates have been set, but nothing has happened. So the governing body knows that these opposers and opponents are correct. Their Proclaimer's book shows that many dates have been set, but nothing has happened. So why doesn't this fact convince them that Russell and Rutherford were at least false teachers, if not false prophets? Well, again, it's hidden in the realm of their need to believe what they want to believe. In order for their entire lives not to have been wasted by following an illusion that these men are God's organization, no matter what the evidence says, they cannot allow for Russell and Rutherford to be false teachers, let alone false prophets. So if Russell and Rutherford were not part of Jesus' faithful and discreet slave class, then the present members of the governing body are not either. Sounds like they might be out of a job if they claim that. But that Watchtower goes on to say, quote, "Yes, we have had to revise expectations from time to time, but the need to revise our understanding somewhat does not make us false prophets. Such revisions were just for expectations needing some adjustments." So notice here they avoid the word false and they change it to expectations and our understandings and expectations needing some adjustment. So Watchtower is very clever. Whenever it comes to their own teachings, they refer to these as the truth, rich truths, Bible truths, great truths, revealed truths, precious truths, jewels of truth, unsealed truths, scriptural truths, established truths, liberating truths, pure language, Bible teachings, Bible prophecies, scriptural beliefs, unfailing prophecies, extraordinary prophecy, the Creator's promise, the teachings of Jehovah, Jehovah's prophetic word, the sure word of prophecy, true teachings of the Bible, revealed truths of Jehovah. And there's a footnote that says that they used to refer to current teachings as present truth. And we see an example of this in the Proclaimer's book, page 121. So Jehovah's Witnesses look forward to new truths. And of course, we all know that they refer to their religion as the truth. They've also used infallible truth, Christian truth, and God's truth. And the author says about the only term they don't use is the gospel truth. So when Jehovah's Witnesses, when they're prophesying, doesn't happen and it doesn't occur and it doesn't take place as they said, notice some of the things that they call these: errors, mistakes, misplaced zeal, unrealized hopes, previous failures, misinterpretations, misunderstandings, our understanding, misplaced optimism, wrong expectations, hopes and expectations, premature expectations, misplaced expectations, disappointed expectations, errors in their teachings, incomplete concepts, inaccurate concepts, serious disappointments, formerly cherished views, mistakes in their understanding, views in need of refinement, an expressed opinion, cherished errors, wrong beliefs, old truths, past truths, expectations needing some adjustment, matters on which corrections of viewpoints have been needed. So do you see what Watchtower is doing here? When it comes to their mistakes, they make light of it. Certainly, that's how they got away with this book, Millions Now Living Will Never Die. They showed billboards stating that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were going to be resurrected in 1925. When this didn't happen, instead of referring to this previous teaching as false, Well, the society said that it had only been an expressed opinion. Wow. Now, on the other hand, when it comes to other religions and their teachings that do not come true, notice how the Watchtower paints these as falsehoods, false stories, false teachers, false teachings, false doctrines, false prophets, false prophecies, false religious views, false religious teachings, false religious philosophies, doctrines with pagan religious routes, God-dishonoring doctrines of Babylon the Great, the disfiguring of God, nauseating teachings, God-dishonoring, pagan doctrines, godless myths. Yet, Charles Russell and J.F. Rutherford fit the Society's own definition of false prophets. In the Reasoning from the Scriptures book, page 132, we have the definition of this: false prophets. Individuals and organizations that, 1, proclaim messages that they attribute to a superhuman source, but that 2, do not originate with the true God, and 3, are not in harmony with His revealed will. So again, C.T. Russell and J.F. Rutherford fit the bill. They proclaimed these messages and attributed them to Jehovah God, yet they didn't originate with the true God, and they were not in harmony with His will as expressed in the Bible. And also on page 136 of the Reasoning from the Scriptures book, they excuse themselves by saying that they do not claim to be inspired prophets. But the Bible doesn't say that it's okay to put Jehovah's name on their teachings and prophecies by calling them the teachings of Jehovah or the Creator's promise, as long as they don't claim to be inspired. And even there in Deuteronomy, I found it interesting that under the topic of false prophets in the Reasoning book, they go on and on and on about what a true prophet is and say nothing about what a false prophet is, and don't even mention the scripture at Deuteronomy chapter 18 verses 20 through 22. Amazing. So what the Watchtower Society has never been able to admit, that despite the thousands of portions of wrong food at the wrong time that Russell and Rutherford provided during all those years down till 1919, the Society has never been able to admit that those men were false teachers or false prophets. The most fundamental reason why they haven't been able to do this is because they simply cannot do so and still claim that the Watchtower Society is God's organization. So although they have figured out how to admit making mistakes, they say it doesn't matter. They have not figured out how to admit to making false teachings and prophecies. And then they go on to say that it doesn't matter what those men were teaching because that's old light. That's over 100 years ago. And then the author talks about motives. Because of course the Watchtower Society has always they have always have had something to do with why someone stated something, their motives. One of the consistent things that comes through when reading the governing body's warnings about false teachers and prophets is that these real false teachers and prophets, they say, deliberately teach things that they know are not true and or proclaim things that they know are false for the purpose of intentionally misleading others. How do they view Russell and Rutherford? That these were sincere men who never intentionally tried to mislead anyone. These men were being zealous, sometimes even overzealous, to see God's will accomplished. Oh, their motives were so pure. That's what the Proclaimer's book, page 714, says. So Watchtower leadership has never accepted that pure motive excuse when anyone else tries to use it. The standards they use to judge everyone else is sincerity alone is not enough. And John chapter 4 verse 24, those worshiping God must worship in spirit and truth. Well, that applies to everyone else except for themselves. So it isn't motives that label people false teachers and its prophets. It's their false teachings and prophecies, as mentioned in Deuteronomy 18:20 through 22. And then the author speaks about a spirit-directed, uninspired true prophet. The governing body does not deny that the organization claims or acts to be God's prophet. What they do deny is that they are inspired. So somewhere along the line they came up with a new idea that it's okay to put God's name on their teachings and prophecies as long as they don't claim to be inspired. But according to the Bible, there are two kinds of prophets, true and false. A true prophet is inspired. A false prophet is uninspired. But the way the Watchtower spins this, we're not inspired, but we're true prophets. Therefore, they are an uninspired true prophet. Therefore, we have the illusion of a spirit-directed, uninspired true prophet to go along with the illusion that they are God's organization. So they're unable to see what they're actually saying for themselves. We have a footnote here. It mentions that Deuteronomy 18:22 simply says that a false prophet is one that speaks in the name of Jehovah, and two, the word does not come true. So that is the way it has been many times for the Watchtower Society to justify calling someone else a false prophet. But again, these verses don't speak about anything of inspiration, nor does it speak of being infallible. So really, Jehovah's Witnesses are the only ones that attribute God's name to these prophecies. None of the other false religions, and I use that term with quotation marks, these false religions don't put God's name to their prophecies. So the religious leaders of the Watchtower have always proudly put Jehovah's name on all their teachings and yet deny that they have ever said anything in the name of Jehovah. And of course they deny being inspired. But when they talk about other religions that don't even use Jehovah's name, they say that Jehovah will expose the falsehood of these prophecies of the clergy. He will not fulfill what they are saying in his name. March 1st, 1994, Watchtower, page 11. And then he follows and ends this chapter talking about Matthew chapter 7 verses 15 through 20. And here we have an illustration how to recognize false prophets. Jesus Christ said that they could be recognized by their fruits. Just as we can recognize rotten apple trees by the rotten or worthless fruit that they produce, we can also recognize rotten false prophet trees by the worthless false prophecies they produce. But the governing body usually does this bait and switch when it's time to identify false prophets. They switch it up to how to identify true religion. And in 2006, there was a worldwide campaign using a Kingdom News tract entitled "The End of False Religion is Near." Now, if you were a Jehovah's Witness back in 2006, you probably remember having to place this tract at people's homes. And I was very uncomfortable placing this tract because it was such an over-the-top denunciation of everyone's else religion. I was just thankful for every door that no one showed up at, and I could just leave the tract on someone's door. But instead of going under false doctrine and talking about that further, they try to identify true religion. And of course, they use this illustration of the good fruit that Jesus was talking about. And this good fruit just so happens to be everything that the Jehovah's Witnesses teach. So instead of expounding on what false religion and false prophets are, they use the bait and switch to talk about what true religion is and further their indoctrination of people. So this has been the conclusion of chapter 7. I thank you for listening to all 21 minutes of this, and I will see you for the next chapter. Thank you for taking time to watch and listen to this presentation. Post your comments, like and share this video, subscribe to my channel, and stay tuned for the next episode.